First of all, our capital campaign for Georgia 3. Um, we had our initial Sunday last week where we turned in pledge cards, and the response was great. I think some of you got the text, like 21 pledges so far, about $1,600 a month, and that'll help us. That's a tremendous response off the bat, and that's going to help us going forward. We had a testimony from that this week, and I'm just going to ask Brother Jim Johns if he would come up and share his and Mary's experience this week with theirs. Brother Jim, could you come? And I don't know where the mic is. I'll do it this way. Here, you just have to stand close to me.
I'm not sure this will work. I got hearing aid.
Oh, yeah. Well, that is going to be a problem.
Perhaps you can everyone hear me?
Oh, yes. Highway Patrol boys.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. We give this testimony as a
I'm back on. Isn't that fabulous? When you are obedient to God, well, it's the same principle. He gives it back to you, right? If you have not yet filled out a pledge card, we've got some, and let me see. Maybe we could just take a quick moment to hand them out to anybody that needs one that wasn't here last week to hand it out. Yes, Brother Clayton, if you could do that, just hand them out. And yeah, just raise your hand if you need one. Maybe you weren't here last week and you want to get a pledge card. Jason over here. Okay, And then, let's see, by way of other announcements, next Sunday is our missions convention. So that's when we have a missionary come in and we have a focus on missions. On Saturday night before, so this coming Saturday night on the 19th at 5:30, we're going to have a fellowship dinner here at the church. Lots of different cuisines, and you can, if you'd like to bring something, a dish for that, you can talk to Kathy Lewis right here, Kathy Wavas, and she'll help coordinate that. But it'll be a great time of fellowship, and it'll be sort of like sit down with a missionary. And I'll just tell you that when you sit down at a table with a missionary, you really catch their heart, and it gives you that perspective that you need on missions. And so it's just a great casual atmosphere to be able to do that. So, encourage everyone to be here next Saturday afternoon at 5:30. And then, of course, the missionary will be with us next Sunday morning. Her name is Diane Oliver, and she's a missionary to Northern Asia and to China, which is, as you know, not the easiest part of the world. So please make plans for that. And then we have no service tonight, so it's just a time of fellowship. Okay. So again, welcome. And I mentioned earlier that Pastor Brent was away this morning. He's actually dropping Isaac off at college, so you'll want to remember him probably about sometime this afternoon when he and Gigi get in the car and coming home. That's when the emotions are going to start hitting, that they're leaving their son away, or maybe they're rejoicing. I don't know, whichever it is. But please remember all of our college students as they're going off to college. I think Stuart dropped his girl off last week, and so that was, I'm sure, an emotional thing for him. And then Bart and Belinda are going to have to do it soon as well. So remember them in your prayers, and remember our college students as they go off, that they can continue to extend that light. Well, this morning, I believe, if I understood correctly, he also wanted to take Isaac to church and give him a place to say, hey, maybe this is a place you want to consider going. And that was very special that he was doing that for Isaac, because I moved to college, I hate to say this, but it was like 28 years ago today. I remember it very well, and my dad basically did the same thing for me. He said, son, I really think that you need to attend church here, and he told me where to go. It was Calvary Assembly of God in Dunwoody. I was in college in downtown Atlanta, and I followed his advice. I showed up at church the next Sunday, and I continued to go there throughout my college career, and it influenced the destiny of my life. In fact, I would not be standing before you here this morning if I had not followed my dad's advice and gone to church where he asked me to go. Because about 2 years later, Anna Brady showed up at that church. And about 3 years after that, I finally got up the nerve to ask Anna Brady out, and exactly, and now here I am. But I wouldn't have moved to Thomasville. I wouldn't have met the beautiful woman that God gave me, and the children that I have, as a result of that decision. So why am I saying that? I'm saying that because I want to talk to you today about destiny. The little decisions we make along the way affect our destiny, and God has a destiny for you. Let's just invite God to join us today one more time, and see if we can unpack this a little bit. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to come together once again, and we ask, Lord, that you would anoint this part of the service. Lord, we need to hear your words speaking to our heart, the Holy Spirit, to make these things clear to us, and help us to see, Lord, that you do have a great plan for our life, and you want to unfold it for us, and you want to use us in very special ways. And I pray, God, that you would do that for us this morning. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay, so the fact that you are created on purpose means that God has a purpose for your life. Now, maybe you look at yourself, you look at your past, look at whatever, and you say, well, I don't know what that is. But like I said, he's a very powerful God, and he made you on purpose, and he did it with a destiny in mind. And I don't know what that destiny is for you, but what I want to explain to you this morning or show you is that there are things that you can do along the way to help you find that destiny, but there's also some traps that you can fall into along the way that will keep you from your destiny. And I just want to make sure that we're aware of those, because remember, if we're aware of the enemy's schemes, we can defeat them. And speaking of the enemy, we're talking about spiritual warfare in our Sunday school class, and it was so neat for me this week the way these two lessons tied together. We talked about in Sunday school this morning Paul's discussion on strongholds in our mind. These things that can come into our mind that can really derail us and keep us from doing what God wants us to do, and actually keep us in sin, which means we're going the other direction from God. And if we can be aware of these strongholds in our mind and do something about them, then the possibilities are unlimited on what God can do in your life. So we need a hero from the Bible to help us with this. I associate well with Bible stories. And so the guy that I picked to explain this was Caleb. I could have picked anybody, Joseph, David, whoever. There's lots of good characters, but I picked Caleb. He's a special guy to my family, and this is a special time to remember another Caleb. So I just want to talk to you a few minutes this morning about Caleb and what he went through. What can be between us and our destiny? Well, there's your past. Your past can get in your way of your destiny. Your past can bog you down. We don't want that to happen. You could be afraid of your future. Maybe God reveals to you what your destiny is, and it's intimidating. You go, I can't deal with that, God, no, sorry. Maybe it's what's going on in your life right now that's keeping you, and you get discouraged, and it keeps you from moving forward in your destiny. Or maybe you've achieved a certain measure of success, and then you start getting complacent. All of these things can get in your way, and what we need to do is keep that from happening. So let's talk about Caleb. He grew up in Egypt. He was a slave. The first 39 years of his life, he was a slave, an Egyptian slave. He and 2 million of the other children of Israel. They grew up in Egypt, and all they had known for their whole life was slavery. Generation after generation of bondage, cracking the whip, making the bricks, building the buildings for Pharaoh. It was all they knew. It was all their family knew. And what happens, I guess, to us sometimes is that whenever you get stuck in a certain situation or wherever you come from, the culture you come from, you get stuck in a certain mindset. And this mindset that you get stuck in, whether it's culture or whether it's things that have happened to you, your experiences, they can keep you from moving forward in what God has for you. And what we're going to find is that this same thing happened to the children of Israel. They got stuck in that mindset. So Moses was called to, and by the way, I don't know if I missed that slide. Moses was not called until he was 80 years old. If you think you're too old to be used by God, well, not many of you are 80 yet. I think Lou is pushing it maybe, and not getting close. Brother Jim over here, maybe Mr. Clayton. But, you know, these guys are just ripe for God to call them into full-time ministry and lead 2 million people, right? If you think you're too young, and we do have some young people in here, Jeremiah and John the Baptist were called before they were even born. So there is no age limit on destiny. It can happen to you at any time. It can start from any point in your life. God has a way of doing the reroute thing on the GPS. Okay? So just keep that in mind. So with regard to the children of Israel, Moses was leading them out. And they saw all of the miracles that God performed to do that. And if you've been in church a while, you know the story. If you don't, let me just recap it for you. There were these plagues, so that Pharaoh didn't want to let them go. Obviously, he had free labor, and he didn't want to let them go. But God said, no, you're going to let my people go. And he sent all these plagues. And so the children of Israel saw the miracles, 10 significant miracles that would happen to the Egyptians but wouldn't happen to them. They could see that. When they walked out the door, God gave them favor with the Egyptians, and they basically plundered them. Like 400 years of misery they got paybacks for because they said, just, give me what you got. And the Egyptians just started giving them their possessions, clothes, jewels, everything, gold when they walked out the door. So they walked out wealthy. They went from being slaves to being wealthy just like that. When they got to the Red Sea, they all saw God part the Red Sea. And I always picture it like if you're walking in an aquarium with one on this side and one on this side. I mean, there's this wall of water, and there's some fish going by, and then on this side, another wall of water, walking through on dry land. And then they get to the other side of the Red Sea, and they turn around, and they saw it collapse and cover their enemies. All of those miracles they saw water come from a rock. They were thirsty. They saw water come from a rock. Every morning they got up and their breakfast was waiting for them on the ground. Manna had fallen from heaven or was placed there from heaven, baked in heaven, provided for them every single day. They saw all of this. So, when they get to an obstacle, how do they react? When you face an obstacle, how do you react? Do you defer to your past experiences, or do you default to the greatness of your God? That would be the ideal answer, Danny, is to go with the greatness of God. But you know what the children of Israel did? They wanted to go back. Every time they would run into an obstacle, instead of thinking about all the cool things God had done for them, they would say, we shouldn't have ever left Egypt. Moses, why did you bring us out here to die? There's this one particular one, maybe you go to the next slide, in Numbers, where they're complaining. One more time. They're complaining. And so it says in Numbers chapter 4, verse 11, then the foreign rabble who were traveling with the Israelites began to crave the good things of Egypt. And the people of Israel also began to complain. Oh, for some meat, they exclaimed. Next one. We remember the fish that we used to eat for free in Egypt. Now, isn't that interesting? They were in slavery in Egypt, but what they remember is the free fish. And we had all the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic we wanted, but now our appetites are gone. All we ever see is this manna. Can you imagine trading your freedom for onions? That's crazy. Why would you want to go back to slavery so that you could eat onions? I didn't like onions when I was a kid, and now I can only tolerate them if they're cooked. I appreciate them in food now, but that mindset is just crazy to me. But yet, don't we kind of have the same problem? We know the greatness of our God, but our tendency is to default back to what we know from the comfort level of, even if it was bad, we still want to go back there. As you know, sometimes I travel with my job, and on one of my trips I went to Poland, and I learned about their solidarity movement. It was in the 80s when they switched from communism to capitalism. So this is a great time for the economy of Poland. I mean, they went from being oppressed and under Soviet rule to being sovereign, and their economy exploded. But the people who were raised in communism, and communism is the concept where everybody gets the same. Doesn't matter what you've worked on or what you do, you just get the same. Everybody gets the same. The incentive is gone. In capitalism, it's like what you work for is what you get to reap the benefits of. And the harder you work, the more the benefits. Well, the people who were raised in communism in Poland, the older generation, really struggled with this idea of, how can I work hard and attain all this stuff? They were stuck in, I don't have to do anything and I just get what I get. The younger generation didn't have this mindset blocking them, and they embraced the idea that if I work hard, then I can prosper. And it's the same really with you and me. We've got to let go of our the mindset that we had before from our past, and we've got to embrace what God has for us. So what are some examples of that? Suppose you grew up maybe in a broken home. That's the mindset that you came into this world with, and it's all you know. So does it bother you that then your home becomes broken? Or maybe you have a divorce in your background and you run into a conflict. Do you now say instead, well, God can help me through this? Well, divorce is the easy way out. Let me do that again. Or perhaps you had financial problems along the way, and instead of then make corrections, and instead of changing and doing what's right, then you just get deeper into debt and create the whole scenario over again. Maybe bad relationships. Maybe instead of making the change that you need to make, you default back and get into a bad relationship again. Our past can totally destroy us, keep us from moving forward in our destiny. It could even be in the church. What if you've been hurt in church before? And then you say, I'm not going to put myself in that again. I'm just not going to go to church. The enemy wants to use your past to block you from seeing what God has for you. And if all you can see is the default setting of your past, you'll miss out on your future. Let's say that you are able to work through your past. Let's say that you're able to deal with it, okay? Well, then what's the next thing that you have to look at? Well, what about your future? Maybe God gives you a picture of what he has for you. The problem is sometimes the future has its own obstacles, things that maybe intimidate us a little bit. So you can go on to the next one. For the children of Israel, what Moses did was he sent out some spies. Caleb was one of the spies. And they all went to the land of Canaan, the promised land, right? And they said, okay, let's see what's going on here. Let's check it out. Is it a good land? Is it bad? What's the enemy like? All the things that you should do to prepare for moving forward. All 12 men saw the exact same thing. The question is, what was their perception of what they saw? What was their perspective on what they saw? So if you look in Numbers chapter 13, I should explain. We'll hold it right here. But what they saw was that, yes, it was a good land, but they also saw that there were some really big enemies there, giants, in fact. There were a lot of fortified cities, things that would be difficult for them to overcome. So the future looked great, but it also had some obstacles. Perspective then. The next slide. Caleb tried to quiet the people as they stood before Moses. Let's go at once and take the land, he said. We can certainly conquer it. Okay, so he wasn't worried about how big the enemy was. He only thought about how big his God was. The other men who had explored the land with him disagreed. We can't go up against them. They are stronger than we are. So they spread this bad report about the land among the Israelites, and the land we traveled through and explored will devour anyone who goes to live there. All the people we saw were huge. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. Next to them, we felt like grasshoppers, and that's what they thought of us too, that we were like grasshoppers. 10 guys had the perspective, we can't do it. In other words, the future that God has for us is too hard to overcome. Now remember, they had seen all the things that God had done, but yet still they were intimidated by the destiny that God had for them. 2 guys, Caleb and Joshua wasn't mentioned here, but his attitude was good too, said, no, we can do it. Now, here's what happened. The people were scared spitless. They listened to the report of the 10 rather than the report of the 2. And God got so angry that he was ready to wipe everybody out. So it was another one of those situations where Moses had to get on the ground and say, God, please don't kill him. Please don't kill him. And God said, okay. The Lord said, I will pardon them as you have requested. But as surely as I live and as surely as the earth is filled with the Lord's glory, not one of these people will ever enter that land. They have all seen my glorious presence and the miraculous signs I perform both in Egypt and in the wilderness. But again and again, they have tested me by refusing to listen to my voice. They will never even see the land I swore to give their ancestors. None of those who have treated me with contempt will ever see it. The fear of the future will cause you to miss out on your destiny. Next verse, though. But my servant Caleb has a different attitude. Are you going to have, when you look at your future, what God's called you to do, are you going to look at it with a different attitude? Other translations you'll find say a different spirit. What is your spirit going to be when you look at what God has asked you to do? Is it going to be fear? No, I can't do that. Or is it going to be like Caleb? Yes, we can. My God is big enough to get me through it. In this case, that's exactly what happened. All those people didn't get to go to the promised land. Only Caleb and Joshua, out of all these people, were able to go to the promised land. In my family, this is the picture that I have, or the example that I was given to live by. When I was 7 years old, my parents, not unlike what you experienced, what you just shared with us, Jim and Mary did, they looked at each other and they said, God has called us into full-time ministry. Said it to both of them separately on the same occasion, on the same night, and they looked at each other and said, this is what we have to do. Now, my dad was a factory worker in a can factory. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. Neither of them had any education to speak of. Maybe my mom had a year of college and my dad had some mechanic experience. And that was it. And here God is saying, I want you, now I'm 7 and my brother's 5, I want you to go be full-time ministers. That is a pretty big giant right there. So what my parents decided to do was to drop everything, move to Lakeland, Florida, and go to Southeastern College so that they could become what God had called them to be. They decided to face their giant. Lots of things were against them. The financial aspect of it, how are they going to afford college? My mom's mom told them they were crazy for giving up their good job. What was going to happen to your boys? I mean, how can you do this? But my parents knew they had a call on their life, and they pursued it, and they followed what God asked them to do. So what God began to do right off the bat was he opened up a door for my dad to get a job on staff at a church in Lakeland. He was part-time janitor, part-time youth pastor. And then he opened up the door for my mom to become the secretary of the president of Southeastern College. Pretty neat open door, right? And we made it. My parents made it through college, and my dad made it through college, came out the other side, and then he pastored in Dublin, Georgia for 20 years. He then pastored in Fruitland Park, Florida for 13. 33 years of full-time ministry. Now, they never had the mega churches or anything like that, but God always used them. He always prospered them. He always blessed them. And there are so many people today who have been blessed because of my parents' ministry. They finally retired from full-time ministry a year ago after 33 years of following what God had called them to do. And they were able to retire. On top of that, I think it's part of the testimony. It's part of the reason that I am the way I am and my brother is the way he is. But my brother and I are both serving God in our respective churches as teachers and on the deacon board. And we got great educations, and we have good jobs, and we have good spouses and beautiful daughters. I believe that's a tribute to my parents, at least partially to my parents following the will of God. I always think it's interesting that 10 years after my parents accepted this calling, which was right when I would have been graduating from high school, ready to go to college, that there was a layoff at that factory that my dad worked at. And I've always wondered what would have happened to me if my dad had not followed what he was supposed to do. Don't know for sure, but it's just interesting. What's the point here? The point is you have to face your giant no matter what the obstacles are. Trust God. So what are some examples that we could go with that? What if God's calling you to full-time ministry? What are you going to say? Maybe you hear the missionary next week and you go, man, I think God's calling me to China. Well, what are you going to do with that? You've got to decide. Maybe he's just calling you to teach a class, and you say, well, I could never get up in front of people. Well, you have to decide, are you going to follow this calling, face this giant? Maybe it's sing or play an instrument. Be on the stage? No way. Maybe, Buddy's starting a maintenance team. Maybe you're supposed to serve on the maintenance team. And you say, well, no, I just don't have time to do all that. But if God wants you to be invested in that, he's going to help you clear your schedule to make time. How about paying your tithes? That should be just a basic thing that we do, but yet that giant for so many people is huge. Somehow people can't see God as being bigger than their financial situation. And so they don't do it. But he's asked you to do it, and he's promised that if you do it, he will in turn bless you back for it. Are you going to face that giant or not? How about forgiving somebody? Charlie, you just don't know what they did to me. Well, is God's forgiveness for you bigger than your forgiveness for them? How about asking for forgiveness? Well, I'd be ashamed. But isn't that what God expects from you, to ask for forgiveness? The next one is personal to me. It has to do with witnessing to somebody. You say, well, Charlie, you get up here and you can stand in front of all of us and make an idiot of yourself, no problem. But then when it comes to talking to somebody one-on-one, I just lock up. I'm like, God, you want me to walk up to them and the awkwardness of starting a conversation? What do I talk about? What am I supposed to say? I actually argue with God in this way. Now, once I get going in the conversation, I'm fine. I don't mind talking about things of God. I have no problem with it all. I love apologetics. I love talking about God. That's not the problem. The problem is initiating that conversation. I'm sitting next to somebody on the plane. You want me to talk to him? I know it's crazy, right? It should be the simplest thing in the world. Is my dilemma, though, even though you look at me and say, well, that's crazy, Charlie, is my dilemma any different than yours? Is your God big enough to help you through those things, or isn't he? If we'll face the future, we'll be able to reach our destiny. Okay, what's the next thing? The next thing is that when you get to you reach your destiny, or you maybe, let's say you've conquered these problems with your past. You've conquered the problem with your dealing with the fear of your future, and now you want to say, well, now we're ready, God. I'm ready to embrace it. I'll go for it. Well, then you get the obstacles along the path. You get the timing aspect of it. God, he just shows up whenever he's ready. And that's not usually when you're ready. Look at poor Caleb. He had to wait 40 years. He did what he was supposed to do. It was not his fault that he couldn't reach his and fulfill his destiny. It was not his fault, and he had to wait 40 more years before God actually fulfilled it. Did he get discouraged? Maybe. But he didn't give up. Go to the next one. A delegation from the tribe of Judah. This is after they're in the promised land. They've been conquering the promised land for 5 years. Caleb's like, okay, I've helped everybody else. Now it's my turn. A delegation from the tribe of Judah, led by Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, came to Joshua at Gilgal. Caleb said to Joshua, remember what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, about you and me? Go to the next one. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land of Canaan. I returned and gave an honest report, but my brothers who went with me frightened the people from entering the promised land. For my part, I wholeheartedly followed the Lord my God. So that day Moses solemnly promised to me, the land of Canaan on which you were just walking will be your grant of land and that of your descendants forever, because you wholeheartedly follow the Lord your God. Now, as you can see, the Lord has kept me alive and well, as he promised, for all these 45 years since Moses made this promise. Even while Israel wandered in the wilderness, today I am 85 years old. I love this part. I am as strong now as I was when Moses sent me on that journey. and I can still travel and fight as well as I could. So give me the hill country that the Lord has promised me. You will remember that as scouts we found the descendants of Anak there are great, walled towns, but if the Lord is with me, I will drive them out just as the Lord said. So he was about as old as, let's say, Bart Butler when God made the promise to him. When he finally got the delivery, he was as old as Brother Jim here, Brother Clayton, Brother Lou. Yes, not quite. Thank you, Brother Clayton. You're almost there, but not quite. 85 years old, but look at the attitude. Never gave up. The example I want to give you for this story is not one that actually I enjoy giving, but it's relevant. Brother Charles will appreciate this one, and Jared, because they're FSU alum. But back in 92, so 25 years ago, when it was my senior year in college, Florida State's first year in the ACC, they came to Atlanta to play us at Georgia Tech. And it's interesting in this context because it involved two local high school players, or guys that had played their high school ball here. Sean Jones was the quarterback for Georgia Tech, and he played at Thomasville. Charlie Ward was the quarterback for Florida State, and he had played at Thomas County Central. They had been high school rivals, and the big story was now they were going to be, quarterback in this game. Both went on to have great careers. They both led their teams to national championships. I was a beneficiary of one of them. And but in this game, I remember that is Georgia Tech, we were 4-1 going into the game. We had knocked off two top 20 teams, and we really had a decent team. They came in ranked number 6 in the country. At the beginning of the fourth quarter, we were winning 21-7. They couldn't do anything. And we were able to do whatever we wanted to do, and it was looking good. And then Charlie Ward figured out how to play football. And from that time on, Florida State was pretty much unstoppable. They scored 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, and we only scored a field goal, and they beat us 29-24. And it was so devastating for us that Georgia Tech went on to only win one more game the rest of that season because we let the circumstances affect us. Florida State, on the other hand, my point in bringing this up is they didn't give up. They didn't quit when the circumstances looked bad around them. They continued to play football and ended up winning the game. That's the way you and I have to be. We have to continue to play, and God will bring it all about. Okay, let's say, I'm trying to wrap this up. I know I've been going for a while now. Let's say that you've figured out all 3 of these things. You've taken care of your past. You're not afraid of your future anymore. You're willing to face it, and you're willing to wait, and God has now given you some success. He has helped you to achieve your destiny. What then? Well, you could just kick back and go, well, I'm done. God helped me. He got me here. What I like to remember is something that Pastor always says, and that is that when he's finished with you, he'll take you to heaven. But if you're still here, it means you still have something to do. With Caleb, what did he have left to do? He had conquered. By the way, you notice he still had to defeat his giants. Even though he had to wait all those 45 years, he still had to face the giants and beat them, and he did. He got the country, or the city of Hebron. I don't think we read that part, but that was what was given to him. The way the land was divided up, the tribe of Levi, out of the 12 tribes, they were the one that didn't have an inheritance. All the rest of them had a plot of land that was theirs. Levi was a special group, and the way that God provided for Levi was that there were all these cities scattered out throughout the nation of Israel, the land of Canaan. And 48 of them, and the Levites would inhabit those cities. That was God's provision. Well, guess which one of the cities, that we've talked about was one of the cities? It was Hebron, Caleb's city. Not only that, there were 6 cities that were set aside for people who had committed manslaughter. So if you accidentally killed somebody, the law was that you could go and live in one of these cities and you would be protected from the avenger until the death of the high priest. Again, guess which city was picked? Hebron. I think I could see where if Caleb had been had waited all this time to receive his inheritance, he might have gone, I don't want to give up my city. I waited all this time. I can't, let somebody else give up their city. I waited all this time. Apparently that wasn't his attitude. Now the Bible doesn't talk about his attitude, but what I envision it to be is, if I can provide for the special people of God, the Levites, my city is open. If I can provide for those who have committed a crime but they didn't mean to and it was an accident, and I can provide a haven for them, my city is open. He was willing to continue. I think about my parents again. You know, I said they retired last year, but do you know what they're doing this morning? They're interning at a church. In fact, they're interning at the church that they pastored for 20 years because that church is now without a pastor. So even though they retired from full-time ministry a year ago, their destiny is not complete. God still wants to use them. God wants to use you. He wants to use this church. This church has a destiny. Pastor has mentioned that part of that involves Georgia 3, but it also just involves reaching this community. If you and I collectively will each work on reaching our destinies, then this church together will be able to reach its destiny. But we have to be able to overcome all these things we've talked about. And I said at the beginning, I don't know what your destiny is. I kind of have a feel for what mine is. But I'm still working through that. I don't know what yours is. I pray for my children just about every day to say, God, please position them to fulfill their destinies. Because there is an enemy out there who wants to destroy them. He wants to destroy you and keep you from reaching your goal, because he knows that if you reach it, then God's going to do something special through you. So, positioning is the key. If you don't know what your destiny is, that's fine. Don't sweat it. God will reveal it to you again in the time. What can you do in the meantime? You can just continue to live right. Don't let sin keep you from fulfilling your destiny. Don't go back to the things of the past. Don't be afraid of what God has for you in the future. Hang in there. Don't get discouraged. Just keep plowing through. And as you go forward on this, God will begin to reveal to you what he has for you to do. And he has something for each one of you. I just want to open it up. That was really all I had to share with you this morning. If there's anyone who would like to have prayer this morning, maybe you would like prayer because one of these issues you're struggling with. Maybe you are living in your past instead of moving forward. Maybe you are afraid of what God's asked you to do and you need a little encouragement. Maybe you're discouraged because of what's going on around you right now. Or maybe you've gotten complacent and you need to reload, to recharge. If you'd like to come forward for prayer, the guys will come and join me up here and we'll pray for you. Because I honestly believe that you can do something special for God. So I'll leave it open for a moment. If you'd like to join me up here, please do. The other thing that you might need from God is maybe you don't know him yet. And if you haven't committed to God yet and you need to do that, the altar is open for that as well.
Nothing can compare. You're our living hope. Your presence, Lord. I've tasted and seen of the sweetest of loves, where my heart becomes free. My shame is undone. It's your presence, Lord. Holy Spirit, you are welcome here. Come flood this place, fill the atmosphere, 'cause your glory, God, is what our hearts long for, to be overcome by your presence, Lord. It's your presence, Lord. There's nothing worth more that could ever come close. Nothing can compare. You're our living hope. Your presence, Lord. I've tasted.
Anyone else? Okay. Mr. Clayton has something that why don't you go ahead and share? And the other thing is we need to pray for his son.
God give me a word. Charlie was talking. What he spoke about today. What he spoke about today. Well, right in line with where we at, the Georgia 3 project. What he talked about, and I don't know if he even knew that, but God spoke to me. And, God give this church, you, the congregation, a vision about what to do, but more specifically, where to do it at. God said to you and me, this church, the provisions are over there on Georgia 3. That's why it's called the Georgia 3 Miracle Project. God gave us the vision, but it's up to us what to do with it. Where to obey God or not, we can sit here in the wrong place forever when God said, move where you can do the best good, where I can help you the most. That's what God spoke to this congregation. To go, He gave us 30 acres of land, which was a miracle, 3 separate pieces of property brought together. And He spoke to us and He said, there is where the provisions are at. There's where you need to be. There's where I'll help you the most. There's where I'll meet you at, is on the property I gave you on Georgia 3. And I just had to share that to you. While Moses was on the mountaintop doing business with God, the children of Israel were down there basically doing business with the devil, giving all this silver and gold, making a calf to worship. Well, if they can be that stupid, we can be that smart. Surely we can give enough to build a building that God told us to do, and where to do it at, and where He's going to meet us at to do it.
Thank you, Brother Clayton.
By the way, since Charlie's done exposed everybody's age, I'm probably the oldest in here, or at least close to it.
Well, that's the thing. One thing I was going to point out was that Caleb was the oldest person to enter the Promised Land. There was nobody else besides Joshua over the age of 60. Out of 2 million people that left Egypt over the age of 20, only 2 made it to the promised land. Let's see if we can do a little better than that, right? You said your son has eye surgery?
Yeah, son he had a
Detached
retina.
retina.
Right eye.
Okay.
Able to see out of his right eye now for about 6 weeks, but they just operated on him Friday morning.
Okay.
So I'd like to pray for him.
Maybe, Brother Lou, maybe you could close us in prayer and you could remember Mr. Clayton's son with the eye.